We are in chapter 20 for urban water use and water reuse. And I don't want to belabor the points of the different uses that we can use, but we're getting towards the end of the book. But uh, page 1173, there are some examples of uses that have been used here in the United States. And so you can see air conditioning and cooling towers, fire protection, toilet and urinal flushing, commercial car washes, commercial laundries, water features, and stream cleaning. Most of those, as you can see, other than New York, a lot of those are in California and Florida, and we've discussed why that is. But on page 1175, it talks about some of the outside of the United States, some of the countries that use water reuse, whether that be Australia, France, Japan, Spain, and United Kingdom. When we talk about the factors that affect it, is the infrastructure. If we're going to pick a water reuse project, we want to know that can we have the infrastructure? Are we going to have the political backing to put that infrastructure in? How much is it going to maintain? Is it cost effective to do that? We've talked about this. Once again, water quality. What kind of water quality do we need? And just reassurance to the public that we can provide a good quality product, and then just public acceptance of it. Your community may accept it for irrigation, but they don't necessarily want to use it for toilet flushing. The thought of using reclaimed water in their house, there's just a fear factor there that they just do not will not accept. When we talk about infrastructure, typically we'll have to have a dual plumbing system. We've talked about that in previous chapters. Ways to store that water, ways to deliver that water, and then obviously having a dual plumbing system inside the house or the commercial building. One way that they've talked about um, using it is air conditioning. You can use that water um, in a water cooled air conditioning system. The thing that you need to be careful there is Legionnaire's disease, because you're creating an environment, especially if you're having any kind of air mist contact to cool the water down, especially if you're doing it in a recirc method. You can make a mist of bacteria that can be aerosol that people can breathe in. And so you want to make sure that you are properly treating that for bacteria. And then once again, you're trying to make sure that your corrosion control and your scaling factor in your cooling as well. Fire protection. I really don't know much about that in terms of where that would be used. Like I said, as I've mentioned before in previous chapters, I think the application that normally would be great here for the Midwest would be for irrigation. I think that's really where we um, would probably go. But they talk about an indoor sprinkler system. Reclaimed water is rarely used for indoors uh, systems because dual plumbing is necessary. There's a greater risk of human exposure, and little or no potable water is safe. Once again, for fire protection on the indoor sprinkling system, I mean, how often, hopefully, you're never using that water for indoor fire. So once again, you're kind of putting in a lot of infrastructure for something that is not, going to be really cost effective. Toilet and urinal flushing. It's a neat idea. I could see that we could save a lot of money by doing toilet and urinal flushing. I think the main concern there is just the cross connection factor that you have two types of different water in your system, and it requires a higher degree of awareness there with backflow protection. Laundries, car mats, and then public water features. I don't think it's a bad idea to possibly use that for a public water feature, especially in some of those arid climates. Using that water. I know they've talked about snow melting, where in Japan, they've used it to melt snow, reclaimed water to melt snow. And then I've also read where they can actually use it to make snow. So that's chapter 20, a real quick one. I appreciate you. Thank you.